Want to hear from the Lord. I think that's probably a daily desire during times that we like now, when there seems to be a lot of uncertainty and unclarity. Then I think we that much more we want, most of the time, situational clarity from the Lord. That's very understandable. I mean, I desire that for myself, from my own perspective. So maybe we can have some conversation about that a little bit today. We are very obviously in a time of some sort of transition, and I would like for us as a people to be able to get our hearts and minds around the nature of that transition. That does include our brother Emmanuel's life, involvement, and what his appointed ministry in our midst has been. But let's remember that anything that's appointed by God comes from God and not from a person. And so it's what God sets out to do, he will do. And while Emmanuel carried a very considerable burden along that line, it doesn't mean that wasn't a burden that belonged to the Lord, nor a goal or outcome that God would want to see shift. It wasn't local. It wasn't so local and time restrained that without the presence or prodding of a single person should it not continue. Let's not forget that the apostles that walked with Christ Jesus are no longer on the earth, and they carried a pretty substantial mantle passed down from them. You know, Elijah passed his mantle to Elisha, yet Elisha is no longer alive. You know, and so please do not think that I'm speaking in terms of morbid terms or fatalistic terms in relation to Emmanuel's life. I'm not doing that. The Lord has done some miraculous things already to preserve Emmanuel's life thus far. He is in a very difficult place. But the point that I'm making at the moment is that we would not honor God's appointment in Emmanuel's life, nor the person of Emmanuel, if we were to turn our backs or lay the reins down on the work that God has given us to do as a people of God, to build up the culture of his household and to see a generation rise up and take their place. And that would be a great loss. And it wouldn't be just a great loss to a man who's on a sickbed right now. It would be a loss of a generation to the Father. And so let's keep our hearts and our hopes and our minds set where they need to be, in a heavenly place, with a heavenly goal, and with a divinely ordained end in mind. And by end, I don't mean stopping point. I mean a fulfillment that God has for his people. What we will find, regardless of the outcome of whatever seasons we go through in life, is that God ordained those things to enable his sovereign will to be fulfilled. That we struggle with it and wrestle with it in the moment is inconsequential to the reality that God's purposes will be fulfilled. Where we need to find ourselves is in alignment with God's purposes and not with the insecurities, fears, and unknowns of various circumstances. Those will always exist in life. We have no control of when they will come, when they will go, how they will be resolved. And that's why God is the only constant. God's purposes don't change. What he desires from his people has not, will not, never will change. And those who have gone before us look on from the heavenly realm with joyful anticipation of this fulfillment. So that's really where we need to find solace and peace and rest for our hearts in times of trouble. In times of trouble, we tend to narrow down and put a little protective bubble around ourselves, our family, our own community, and all of our concerns are related to what's inside that little tiny circle. And if God's been doing something with us and with this younger generation for a number of years now, it has actually been to break that mold of human existence and and man's attempts to try to put a shroud of Christianity around that same small-minded, narrow-viewed existence. And now's not the time to put on those clothes. Now may be the time to really renew and revive again what we've been set apart for, by whom, and to what end. And so, while we're going to have a few very obvious changes through whatever season of time that Emmanuel's going through, what he's going through, the work of God should not be rested on him alone, nor on me alone, nor on any other individual people. Each will have role and responsibility as appointed by God. We want to be very careful and attentive to God to know how that works out on a daily and seasonal basis, because we want to hear from the Lord. And that's really the cry of my heart, is to hear from the Lord. I do think that God has given us some things to work with and not left us alone. John asked me the other day, are you hearing from the Lord? I'm not really hearing anything. He's pretty silent. I will say this, on a personal level, I'm not hearing a lot of direct word from the Lord. But on a corporate level, I think God is giving us some things to work with. And I think that's purposeful on God's part. This is not a one-man show for anyone. And so, let's more than ever, let's take this as an opportunity to really learn how to lift one another up in prayer. Let's be sure that we're lifting up leadership and heads of household, not just for protection from the enemy, but for divine discernment and hearing from the Lord. And let's really see that that where we can be stirred and activated in the Spirit can be done with wholeness and purity and without any selfish or self-centered input there. That's just paramount right now. We're in a state of, yes, I will say, even a little bit of confusion because we're waiting for the dust to settle a little bit. But let's not give opportunity for the enemy to come in and cause significant damage because of some former things that have always troubled God's people. So we need to have a very much a high alerted awareness and soberness of heart and vigilance of spiritual mind, so that we can ward off the tactics, the threats, and the attacks of the enemy in every way. This is not just local. It's happened to several other leaders that we've engaged with in other parts of the world. I don't know how to fully quantify that yet. I don't have to understand it. It's very clear what's going on. And in that broad sense, it's not necessarily perfectly clear how we take every step. So how does today go? I don't know. Probably not like former times, but that's okay. We're gonna work through that. What I'm also not gonna do is act as if we just go on with whatever we thought we were doing before, because that's not how we were doing things before anyway. Even as it pertains to topics that we teach and otherwise, there may or may not be a time soon coming when I can resume some topics for teaching. Now's not that time. Today won't be that day. We're real people. We live lives. We have jobs. We have families. We have one another. We have a hole in our community because of someone that we very much okay, that was unexpected. Love and care for. And we just want to lean into the Lord. Amen, and hear from the Lord. Okay. I'll give you guys as much of an update as I can. My tears are not of desperation or of huh? What word?
I said frustration.
No, or just, not of fear, not of, anyway. It's just, there's a lot there. There's a lot going on in a lot of arenas. Our brother has been through some really extreme highs and lows for a number of weeks now. And his physical condition is very difficult. I don't know what else to say about that. I think he had some previous health issues that were actually very problematic, and they presented themselves in such a way now as to actually become life-threatening. And so it's a burden to know that we carried him out as long as we did before taking him in. That was per his request, but I still feel a lot of weight there of responsibility. Anyway, sorry. The Lord spared his life, and he a couple days ago he crashed in the hospital again. And so, if you don't know what that means, it means that his vital signs came to a place where, had they not intervened, then his life would have gone away. They have maintained stability again. In fact, they had to do another emergency surgery last night at 3:45 in the morning, and just some blood-related things. He had a pretty big blood clot in his heart. It disappeared. They didn't know where it went, and I think they may have found it and done surgery in his leg to try and remove that. So if that's the case, it's actually really good news for them to be able to remove that. A blood clot can cause instant death. Actually, if that clot gets somehow passed through the heart and releases to the brain, then it can cause very quick and severe damage. So our brother did have a stroke. He actually had more than one, and those are points of the brain that where blood supply is cut off. Here's the wonderful thing is that, and John just reported he just got there a few minutes ago. Emmanuel is still fully lucid. He has, through this entire process, he has known where he is, he has known who he is, he has known who we are, he knows what's going on. His primary concern is this community and this young people. He asks about you by name. He wants to know the spiritual progress in your life. So not one thing has changed there. I can assure you of that. There is not any loss of his attention there. In fact, I think that there has been and will be a gaining of some insight through these experiences. Your mind, when your body quits working in certain ways, your mind tends to track into different arenas of human existence, different realms of communication and frequency. You guys don't know, we won't discuss it today, but the night before we took him into the emergency room, he woke up in the middle of the night, and interestingly, I have sleep set up on my phone or whatever. That night, and that was the Sunday that we had met together as men, and Rach and Kim, just to kind of rediscuss how we were going to continue to care for Emmanuel. And we were trying to decide whether or not and when would be the appropriate time to make the decision to take him into emergency. But anyway, Monday night, I turned sleep off because I just wanted to be available if I was needed. We had, a camera set up in his living room and then a Ring doorbell set up so that he could call us in need for an emergency. So I woke up at 2:22 Monday night and saw that I had missed a call from John, and he had called about 3 minutes prior to that. And I didn't wake up or answer, but then I stirred and woke and looked and saw it was 2:22. And so my habit at that point was to get out of bed and check the cameras and see if there were any events, notable events, check on his breathing, whatever else. Well, that's when I noticed that I missed a call from John. So I got on the camera really quickly, and he and John were sitting in the living room, and Emmanuel was just talking. I was like, okay, this is different. But basically the Lord had given Emmanuel a word. For me in particular, that's why John had called, because Emmanuel wanted him to call so he could speak to me. But when I was on the camera listening to it, I didn't want to interrupt because I knew what an effort it was for Emmanuel to even be able to speak. So I didn't want him to have to start over, whatever. And John recorded the whole conversation for me as well. All to say, Emmanuel is very much engaged and aware of things in the spiritual realm. He has not personally been hearing a lot from the Lord, and I think that that's maybe in regards to his specific situation and some of the whys and hows. But I know that there's something else going on in the man's spiritual mind and life that has not yet been unveiled quite yet. And somehow God is using this experience in his life personally and as his life representative of certain things as it pertains to Christianity, and I think also as with the nation of Israel. I won't go into a lot of detail there. I think it is helpful to pray for a guard and protection over his life and for the healing and restoration of his body. I think that's appropriate. But in your intercession, please take time to take God's standpoint of view and not your own. Don't let your emotions drive you there. That's about all that I know about his current state and condition. He is very likely to be in the hospital there in Seattle for at least another week, possibly 2, depending on what his recovery cycle is going to look like. So he also has mobility in the sense that he can follow a command, he can respond to you, he can hear, he knows the words you're saying, he can speak back to you. He's very lethargic, his speech is a little slurred. If you say move your right foot, he can do that. If you say you move your left hand, he can do that. He can do all those things. What we don't know yet is whether he can stand and keep his balance or whether he can walk yet, because your brain is a very interesting organism, and the way that it connects your limbs together via the nervous system and muscle activity is very specific. Sometimes when certain parts of your brain are affected, so where the stroke was is actually dead brain tissue, so it goes away. And so if that affected some parts of his body in that way, here's the other miracle of the brain can relearn it. So that's 100% possible. The brain is 100% capable of doing that. What it can't do is just instantly know. It has to relearn. So we don't know what's ahead. Physical therapy hasn't gone that far yet. Because of the ups and downs that he's had, there was a complication that actually was initiated accidentally at the emergency room that wasn't found out until 3 days later because the problem was exacerbated by medication, and that is likely what caused the most recent crash. And so they, in essence, from a physical therapy standpoint, they've had to start over again. And the other thing that the poor guy hasn't been able to do for almost a month now is eat much. And anybody would be disoriented and weak and incapacitated without proper nutrients. So all that being said, I'm not coming to any conclusions about anything in relation to his situation, except that this is a pretty crazy experience right now. We will be in continued communication with some of the brothers and sisters as well about what future visitation looks like. Right now he's back in ICU. He was out. They're trying to get him back out of ICU. There's a few more things they need to do before they can do that. Once he's in a regular room, receiving some occupational therapy and physical therapy, then regular visits will be open. But we'll probably want to talk about that as a community to see how and when and how often we can get there, so we can spread that out a little bit and share that, and it not just be, myself or John excuse me, driving back to Seattle. It is quite a trip. So anyway, that is the update on Emmanuel. Does anybody have any questions or concerns at the moment? I'm not necessarily keen to go into medical or operational details, but if you have some other comments or questions or concern at this point, feel free to voice that. Okay.
I guess I could say something that just connected today.
Yeah.
Which is not like about his physical stuff, but we were talking about the Lord of the Rings today, and Samwise takes on the role of the ring bearer when Frodo is taken out by Shelob, and put in a place of having to mount up into a new kind of mindset and a new kind of
he really wrestled with that.
Path that he had to really Justin was talking about having to pass over the threshold and head towards death, anyway, it just has been standing out to me the last week or so, like, that of course we miss Mr. Emmanuel and dearly look for that spiritual connection. God's doing something in our hearts and minds to raise us up into a new place, I believe. So.
And I think more important than us, illustrations like that are very poignant. I encourage you not to try and put people in roles in those illustrations. There's a spiritual activation that's taking place, and that's the primary emphasis of God's work in this moment, is that spiritual activation in each life and for us as a body. Interestingly, I think something that I'd like to do today, because I haven't gotten to it, it's not as tedious and laborious probably as I have imagined it to be, but I've been sick and unable to do much at all. And today I'm feeling well enough to be out and speaking, and I haven't been at that point yet. But I would like for what I had intended to do was we met with Emmanuel. I don't know if it was that same Sunday, I think, and we listened together with him the first portion of the vision that Nicole had only a few days after he had the stroke. And I feel like the Lord really gave us some, at least initial level of insight and with that vision and some of the implications of what that means for our community, and maybe how some things are going to play out a little bit. Visions are not in this sense meant to be future tellers at all. I think it's more about insight and some understanding and settlement than it is, a prediction of something. So presumption is something that we need to be very aware of and careful of during this time. Having said that, prior to Nicole's vision, I had a pretty strong impression of interestingly, a Lord of the Rings illustration, but there was something about this that reminded me of the situation actually where Gandalf passed when he fell at the bridge of Khazad-dûm, and it was really interesting because even leading up to that point, he had mentioned on a couple occasions that there were foes that he had not yet faced, and he didn't know, he hadn't been tested by those things yet, in essence, which, I won't do the giveaways since you guys aren't there yet, but all to say, with that particular instance, there was his engagement with this Balrog was in that time and placement for Gandalf like a death sequence. And he fought to the death and overcame, but died all the same, and then was, in essence, made to be new and sent back. And, I had a bit of an impression about that in relation to this situation, that there were some similarities. I don't know what that means physiologically for Emmanuel, but I'm only sharing that because in Nicole's vision, there is very much a pretty dramatic sequence that takes place that is at least giving us some indication that God is giving us something to work with and how to navigate this. And I do not presume to fully understand it, but I know that there are those who have not heard it. And my intention in sharing is not going to be to create more confusion than what is there. Visions can do that because they can be very enigmatic, and sometimes imagery is very hard to understand. So going back to what I had intended to do, Emmanuel wanted that conversation recorded, and we had not recorded it. And so my intention was actually, and I've done this much, I recorded the vision onto Plod so that I could transcribe it, and then I was going to take the transcription and kind of try to reiterate the things that we had shared together, because the Lord gave me a lot of insight there along with some others' input. So today I'd like to take a little bit of time to do that. If we have time, we may listen to some of the second portion. As far as I understand, Nicole, that vision is still unfolding for you. I think that's important for us. There are some aspects of the second vision that are, or the second portion of this vision, that by imagery had some similarities to something that Justin saw when we first gathered as men, holding the four corners of the tent. That's very interesting, with the areas of his mind being held open in a similar fashion. And so the intention here is not, here's my intention, guys. It's not to try and parse this vision with such detail right now, so as to tell you this is that and this is this in an exact meaning. What I really want you guys to understand is that when we go through certain things in life, that we, before Nicole's vision, I felt a lot of burden come on my shoulders to try and have something to say, to lead, to guide other people. That's fine. That's a God-given responsibility. But I want you guys to know how we want to hear from the Lord. And if I can exemplify that in any way, then my heart and my request before God was, really, I didn't want, in essence, to hear something directly from God. Not in this moment. I really wanted that to come from another source, so that we could see how we can use God's people to be led by God's Spirit. Having that always come from a leading source can be very misleading sometimes, and cause a dependency that's unnatural or not meant to be the way that God functions. And that hasn't been the case with Emmanuel. This is a pattern that I've seen our brother practice. As actually, as strong and forthright as he is very careful to wait upon the Lord. Does he hear things directly? Absolutely he does. But he seeks out the gifting and the word of the Lord. And most of the time, let me say this about Emmanuel. Most of the time, when Emmanuel hears directly from the Lord, he does not share. Most of the time, he waits till the Lord confirms that through another vessel. Okay? And so that's the pattern I'm going to follow. And not because Emmanuel is somebody, but because I really believe that our dear brother has found something that is close to the heart of God in the way that God wants to make himself known in the midst of his people. That's a relational interaction on their part, and he is the priority there. And so that's my intention in sharing this, is because where I immediately went to in my own heart was, Lord, I need you to do something. I need you to bring something forward. I have my own impressions. I have some understanding, but I don't want to move on that because I want this to be something that you affirm and that you approve of so that we can move together as a people. So for those of you online, I hope this can be heard well. So we'll try this. Maybe I'll just play a little section of it to see how the sound quality is, and then
we could probably put this next to one of those speakers if that.
Well, I don't know if it'll be more helpful there, or if it would be helpful for me to just play it straight through my phone. I don't know.
Just killed the sound, Andy. Whatever you just did.
We killed the sound?
Yeah.
I turned on the original audio for like when we do music, hoping that it could grab it out.
Can you guys still? Oh, they said it went silent on it.
You're on mute, Tim. The speaker's on.
This?
Yeah. There we go. We back?
There we go. I think we're back now. Sorry.
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah, I bumped the little speaker here, and it when I set it back in place, I must have hit my mute. So I haven't played anything, but I'm gonna open this up and just get into it a little further, just to see how the sound quality works. You guys, I'm gonna play about 5 seconds or so. You tell me what the sound quality is like.
Get off of the highway. And then he turns and he looks in a direction.
How's that? Were you guys able to hear that okay?
Sure, also to me that is loud and clear.
It's loud and clear?
I can hear it good. Yes.
Okay.
It's clear.
Okay, I will let you know that Nicole's a crazy lady and she made a bunch of noise at the beginning of this video, or this, I'm just kidding, Nicole. But there's some scratchy noise at the beginning, so that's not me. It's just the recording. Bear with it for the first couple of minutes and it'll clear up. So I'm gonna play this vision and then we can kind of move through it a little bit. It's not short.
This is a vision that's really having, I'm not completely sure when exactly it started, but it was when Emmanuel was first down and not feeling well. And it's now August, and the vision continues on August 3rd, and I am having a lot of trouble with it. It's being completely blocked at some point, but I'm going to start recording because I don't want to lose the first half. The vision starts out in the mountains, and going around the side of the mountain is this highway, and I think it's like a 5-lane highway, and the cars are all going in one direction. And as I zoom down on the highways, I can just see people in their cars driving, and I see Emmanuel out on the highway, and he's trying to stop them from going any further. He's walking and he's getting in the way of their cars, and he's trying to stop them. And you can see that the people in the car are parents with their children, and the state that they're in is the parents are angry and the children are oblivious. So the adults are frustrated by the stopping, while the kids are complacent and sort of without care or concern, distracted. And so this is what's going on there. And then behind Emmanuel, I see a line, I believe, of our people in the community, and they're holding hands and they're standing across the highway. And at this point, you can tell that Emmanuel's trying to basically warn them that they need to leave the highway. They need to get off the highway. And not many listen. I think a few get off of the highway. And then he turns and he looks in the direction that is where we are holding hands. And a huge flood is coming. A huge water is coming to basically pummel over these people. And the water actually, as it comes, you can see Emmanuel, he's bracing for the impact. He puts his arms up and is ready to get hit by the water. But once the water reaches him, he realizes that he actually has power to hold it back even longer. So he holds the back by himself. He holds the water back from hitting the people and gives them more time to get out and go. And I think this is actually where some of them start to get out of the car and go. Before that, I don't think they budged. Anyway, but the water has hit our people, and it really doesn't affect us much, but it does hit us. And so the water is like coming at our backs and kind of pushing forward, and we're still holding hands. And the Lord clearly showed me that the power is in the holding of the hands. The power, the white light power, is where the two hands are clasped together. That's where the power is. And as this water hits the backs of the people, they stay still and are moved. But there's also a water that's throwing up out of their mouths, or our mouths, or whatever. And so, as Emmanuel, the water's coming, Emmanuel's holding it back, but he's letting them know, you need to go. And then finally, he starts to somehow his arms are able to stretch out and reach, and he starts to take rock from the mountain and starts to build a rock wall out of rock. And the wall is between him and us. So he builds it between him and us, and so the water is no longer coming through that wall anymore. But now I almost want to say a second judgment or something comes, because from where he took the rock to build the wall, the whole entire mountain slides, the whole wall, the whole mountain crumbles, and it wipes out the entire highway and all the cars that are on it. So there's no more people or anything like that. And then at this point, the wall falls, and it falls on top of Emmanuel and crushes him. And we're still holding hands. And at this point, what happens here? I can't remember which comes first. Tim, he lets go of one of the hands of somebody and holds his hand flat, and out of his hand comes this army regiment, and it goes over to, nope, I already said it wrong. Tim lets go of the hand, or tries to pull everybody forward to lift the wall, and the wall he can't move forward because there's someone on his right side that's asleep, has fallen asleep, and he can't wake him up. And so in order to go towards the wall, he actually has to take this person and drag them to the side, because they can't be part of this line anymore because they won't wake up. So he takes the person that's asleep and puts him to the side, and then is able to walk over to the wall. But the wall can't be lifted up. It's still too heavy. So he takes his right hand, and he lays it flat, and out of his hand comes this army regiment. And the army regiment actually goes forward on top of the wall, and there's actually a dark a darkness over the wall, which is why it couldn't be lifted. It was something that was on top of it, and it was a dark shadow or smoke or something. And this army regiment comes and it takes care of it. It's all kinds of different army men in different positions, and they come and they kind of wrestle this darkness, and they take it away from the wall, which allows the rest of the body that was not sleeping to come and lift the wall off of Emmanuel. Now, when the wall is lifted up and off of him, what takes place under there is now I want to call it a wrestling, gosh, what's the name of it? It's where men go and wrestle. It's like they're in this fenced-in area almost. It's like a dojo type situation, where it's all like a square and the people go in there and they wrestle. Anyway, Tim goes through the fence there, or I don't know the right words, what it's actually called, but anyway, you know what I mean. He goes through the ropes, and he goes to Emmanuel. And he's straddling over the top of Emmanuel, and he's telling Emmanuel to look at him. He's pointing with his two fingers to his eyes, like, look at me. And then he starts to examine Emmanuel all over. And, well, he looks also at Emmanuel and is like, can you hear me? You can't hear me. And you can't hear him. I can hear that Emmanuel cannot hear Tim's voice. But he's trying to get him to hear him and listen to him. And so, Tim starts to observe his entire body, like looking in his ears, looking over his arms, looking over his whole body, and starts to try to get him to hear him. What takes place here has been why this vision has taken me so long. I'm having a really hard time understanding what's going on. Not that I fully understand visions ever anyway, but at this point, I see Tim there, and I believe that he's hitting Emmanuel, and I just it's not his character in any way, so it was really hard for me to understand what's happening there. And that doesn't seem to do anything to wake him up, so he backs away, kind of stands in the corner with an observing face, and allows or just sits and watches while actual wrestlers come and just basically do like wrestling moves on Emmanuel, still with no release from the state that he is in. And there's just an observing that Tim is doing. And his attire actually changes. He changes into like a cowboy hat with like a long parka type thing with a piece of wheat in his mouth while he observes. And then he goes forward and tries again to see if he can, fight Emmanuel to get him to wake up. And that didn't work, so he changes into like a detective's outfit. Same thing with the hat, like a trench coat type thing. Still trying to observe. And then at this point, he kneels next to him, and he has like a messenger bag, and he starts to pull out these rocking horses. I think there's I can't tell how many there is. I think there might be 9. I don't know. And he sets them up next to Emmanuel. And he gets them out of the bag and just sets up these horses. And they're actually in stages. They start out as a rocking horse, and then they start out as a standing horse, and then they go into a galloping horse. And they're these little tiny horses. They're not like really big ones. They're just these like miniature things. The horses are then, Tim reaches down and grabs the horse that was galloping, and he puts the horse in Emmanuel's mouth to be consumed, and Emmanuel does respond to this. He chews it up and is able to kind of realize that was good and needed for consumption. this is kind of where the vision starts to really get distorted, and I can't see past this. I had to continue.
So that's the first portion of the vision. I think it's obvious enough, certain things related to, Emmanuel being in a incapacitated state that are a fairly direct correlation to certain things. Hopefully it gives us a little bit of spiritual insight as to the nature of what's going on. Again, my intention is not to detail or to explain every detail of the vision. The Lord is still bringing further clarity to those things. I think we know very well that Emmanuel has in very essence been served as a messenger and clarion call to a generation, and in opposition to a certain culture that is on a broad highway. And that's his standing in the highway, speaking to parents and children. This combination of what this generation is heading directly into, what is coming at them, and that's this destructive flood. It is a judgment, and they are moving headlong into it. I think their attitudes toward Emmanuel's getting in the way are very telling. So that's worth observing. And that is that the parents are angry, in essence, that their travel, journey, pathway, and direction in life are being inhibited. That's a frustration to them, to the point of anger. However, the younger generation, this is very telling. Younger guys, younger folks, they're completely oblivious to what's going on. That's not good. And that's just as dangerous or worse. That's not meant to make you feel bad in any way, but that should be a real sobering reality to this generation that is completely unaware of the judgments of God that are not just in the future, they are coming at us. And there are those, like our brother, who are fully aware of what is coming. This is not the first. It is not the second, it is not the third, it's not the 10th vision or dream related to a flood as a judgment, and even several that have been very recent, related to someone crying out, a flood coming, and young people. In fact, that was that very vision that initiated some substantial, sobering change in the midst of our engagement with the Culture Center as well. And this has been something that the Lord has been highlighting time and again in our midst, and specifically to the parents, as to be aware of that. Obviously, we as a community have been set apart in certain ways from that generation. I don't think that means that we should completely separate ourselves from the struggles and the mindsets that the family that is represented in the car have. Those are ever a danger to us. We also know that we are not going to be taken away from the judgment. We're going to have to endure the judgment, and that judgment, we will not go untouched. And again, we see that not only has our brother Emmanuel been sent by the Lord as a messenger to a generation, but also as specifically for us, someone who is stand in a position of what should we call that? He's offered some defense and protection for us in the spiritual realm, and he's done that.
Soften the blow.
Yeah, it very much, and to hold back something, to give us some time to get in right order, to be connected in the way that we should be. I think that the line of believers connected hand by hand, I was immediately taken to John's own description of the fellowship, the hand of fellowship that he offers, and that hand of fellowship is that which is the unity between the Father and the Son. And so there's a specific type of relational fellowship in which there is power that has been afforded to us, and that is where our joining in unity is. There's obviously still yet some sort of spirit of slumber and or stupor in our midst, and that is not just singular and individual. I think that it is also something that we need to be very keenly aware of in our spiritual mind and conscience as to what God's going to have to do with that. Does that make sense? So we need to be very aware of that, each person individually. And so then we have a secondary judgment that happens, but in the interim, obviously the flood waters come, we're not untouched by those, and then in order to create, he's holding back the flood in a sense with a grace given to him that was not even initially known. But then he takes stones from the mountain to build a wall for further protection. I am not fully settled on this, and I want some of you to share some insight, maybe even at this point, before I share about that, to see if there is any other insight from the Lord. Guys, let's be very careful. This is not a time for conjecture or just maybe this, maybe that. If you don't have something that you know is from the Lord, then there's no pressure there at all. But if you do, then know that it is from the Lord as well. So we're not sharing this just to take time this evening. We're sharing it so that we as a community can be of the same heart and mind along the lines of what God has given us to ponder about our spiritual placement, timing, and condition. So up to this point in the vision, does anyone else have any other observations or insight that you would like to share?
I had a question actually about just making sure I understood right. From what I heard, the landslide takes out all the cars, right? But it doesn't say anything about taking out our people.
It did not.
Right. The landslide goes to take out the cars that are above that Emmanuel was trying to stop.
Well, if we're around the side of a mountain, maybe I'm envisioning this wrong, and Nicole, you can correct, but the way that I see it, if I'm looking at it, I see the cars coming from the left to the right, Emmanuel coming out on the road, and then we're behind Emmanuel in a line, and then I see the flood coming the other direction.
Up the road.
Yeah.
Towards the cars there.
Which doesn't make sense, because then I don't know how he's blocking the water if it's coming that way, because at first I thought the water was coming the other way. The direction of the water doesn't necessarily matter that much, but all to say the second judgment of the landslide that takes place, she said the whole mountain slid down, but it didn't take us out because we were still there afterwards to remove the stones that he had taken and built the wall with.
Okay. So I just want to make sure I got that right.
Any input that you have, Nicole, or insight, further clarity from the Lord would be helpful if you have that. Or someone else as well. Most of those things seemed quite obvious up to this point. Other aspects do as well. I'm not fully settled in relation to the stones that are pulled from the mountain. You know, they offer a protection. They are in many ways somewhat foundational in terms of their makeup. You know, it's a stone. It was taken out of a mountain. It was obviously poured up what held the mountain up. there's a lot of things that are very interesting about that, and it offered a protection to us. So, that may have been descriptive of I said earlier, no conjecture, but this is I'm not conjecturing. This is just, I'm waiting for further clarity along this line. Things that Emmanuel has taken to lay foundationally for us. But, it's not about an improper use or anything like that, but it is those things that actually have crushed him. And so it is both the fact that he had to do that in order to help and to preserve, but also that those things need to, there's something about something being, mishandled is too critical of a word, but there's something related to that that needs to change, because then that becomes a burden on top of him that can't be lifted, and we can't lift it either. There's a spiritual darkness over the top of that is inhibiting our ability as a community to even remove those stones. So we try to remove them. We can't, not until this supernatural army comes forth to remove the darkness from the stones, and only after that is removed are we then able to take these things and get them off of him as a burden. So part of what I'm understanding there is related to some very fundamental and foundational things, and related to spiritual truth, principle, and teaching, and that they're going to have to be carried not just by one person. That's been too much of a burden on him, but it's also been for our protection, to protect from the coming judgments. And so maybe the Lord will bring more clarity along that line. Anyone else? Noah, you have any insight? Anything to add?
Just now I'm reminded of 2 visions that I've seen for Emmanuel this year. Both received in times of prayer for Emmanuel, and he's directed me and often others to keep him in prayer and receive something for him. And the pattern in these 2 visions that I'm recalling is that in both there's a giant woman who either comes out of or is a mountain, and he in both visions actually battles against this woman, which I think, at least in what Emmanuel has shared with me, his understanding of those visions represents Babylon, or the harlot, or something related to that. And so,
sorry to interrupt. Could Noah come closer a little bit? It's hard to hear.
not too far. Okay. I don't know how much was heard. I was just saying I am reminded of 2 visions that I have had for Emmanuel this year, both of which involve a giant woman that in both visions either is a mountain or had come out of a mountain, and Emmanuel battles against the woman. In the first vision, which was a little bit longer, I don't think I have to share every detail, but he I think what's relevant is that at the latter part of that vision, Emmanuel is standing on top of a mountain, actually, but it's a mountain that's a part of like a mountain range that forms like a basin with a valley within, and he's facing outside that basin. I believe he's facing. There's a recording of the vision somewhere, but I think he's facing south, and this mountain-sized woman is coming towards that basin, and Emmanuel's actually wearing. He's wearing like this ancient Chinese armor. You know, that really heavy set often very elaborately engraved armor. It's usually like a deep red or something, like not like samurai armor, but like a Chinese warlord. I don't really know how to describe it very well. Anyways, he's wearing that, and cannot remember the exact details of this part, except that I think Emmanuel summons like a wind or something from behind him, I guess from that valley that he seems to be protecting, considering how everything is positioned in the vision. And a combination of that and the woman coming right up to that mountain range and beginning to slip, so flounder actually in what seems to be very muddy ground right beneath Emmanuel, although the woman of course is tall enough to be facing him. And I think in the vision she topples over, and I cannot remember if she ends up sinking or if after having toppled over Emmanuel comes and finishes the job. But that's that first vision, and I'm reminded of it because I feel like it may be somewhat related to Emmanuel and landslides, and there being some kind of protective influence that Emmanuel has had in that regard, how that might relate to Nicole's vision. And then the second one more recent, I think I was reminded of both these visions based off something you said about foundations. I don't remember exactly what you were saying, but that's actually a more recent vision I've had from Emmanuel. I think it was only a few months ago, which is not that long, so I'll just give a full account of it. I just saw Emmanuel come up to a very large foundation stone. It's just it was this is probably the hardest thing to describe in the vision, because it was just large and rectangular, but it was glowing, and almost the surface of it was almost moving with a kind of iridescence, so it was almost rainbow-like. So there was obviously something supernatural about it, and he comes up to it with a sword and slices off a very, very fine layer from the top, and having done so, it immediately shows itself to be a false layer. So there was something that had been camouflaged on the very top surface of this foundation stone, and it turns like into this black, shriveled, actually like hairy mass on top of the stone, which Emmanuel immediately takes up and carries over to the side of a mountain. So we have a mountain again, and it's engraved into the side of the mountain is a statue of a giant woman again. And what he does with this false layer is he puts it up right next to the woman's face, and so along with other similar it would seem to be like false layers that he has collected, and he puts it on the head of the woman. It's like basically like a lock of hair, and that seems to complete the statue, because right after having done so, the woman, I guess due to the weight of what's on her head, topples over and crumbles before Emmanuel. And I think that was all that happened in that vision. I don't know if anyone else sees any more profound connections between Nicole's vision and that, but the underlying connections that I observe are those of an active work on Emmanuel's part against some work of the enemies, and that being a protective endeavor, I guess, on Emmanuel's part. And there's a lot of exposing going on in what Emmanuel's doing as well. And in that second vision especially, I think there was obviously there was that exposure, but there's also a keen focus on the foundational things, which Emmanuel has, even in the last year or two, been having to address repeatedly, which I think involves the discussion, even the battling against the familiar spirit and the religious spirit. Anyways, he never offered too much interpretation or understanding himself about those visions, so there's not much more I can share.
Yeah, I've had a real keen sense that the engagement here is one of a principle nature. That meaning that the dealings in the heavenly realm right now are with principalities. I will not invite a lot of discussion there because it's not a very safe realm of operation for most people, and I'm not putting myself in any position in that at all. I'm just recognizing it. And so, but I do believe that Emmanuel is dealing with entities that are principle in nature, and that's also related to the darkness that is over the pile of rocks in Nicole's vision. I think that is also directly connected to the woman figure in both of your visions. These are principalities, spirits that govern nations, and the mindsets and hearts of peoples. So I'm reminded of the vision that I had, or dream that I had, related to the sword, and the figure that I had to interact with, towards the middle part of that vision, was obviously a female figure that had a great level of dominion and power. And so God's exposure, judgment, and protection all work together as one operation. So that's us being spared from judgment. It can also be indicative of what God is judging, not just who is taken by that judgment. And so when the world's systems in certain ways, even certain nations, are judged. Rachel was actually curious if related to that woman. She was the imagery of the Statue of Liberty, which is not a Christian symbol. It's actually a symbol of rebellion against God and the freedom of man from the gods. And so, it's actually a very rebellious symbol that represents the wrong kind of freedom, actually. And anyway, there's been a lot of imagery that Emmanuel has had in other dreams and visions in years past of a similar nature with female figures in particular, and judgment that comes. The false bride will be exposed. Babylon is revealed to be the false bride, and so the judgments that God is meting out in the earth right now and in the heavenly realms are, again, these are major happenings in the spiritual realm, and they are having an earthly impact. We will definitely be seeing those things. Again, my intention here is not to be predictive of world events or anything like that. It's just a very factual matter that as these things play out, the world is going to be changing very dramatically. That does not change the trajectory of God's sons and the manifestation of God's sons for this time. Moving on a little bit in the vision, this spiritual representation and having some physiological symbolism in Emmanuel's current situation is obviously a little uncanny, but seems to have a very evident correlation. And so I'm confident enough in that to not be too overly concerned with, the reports, the medical reports and what's going on. We're his representative situation is very likely very telling as it pertains to the condition of certain aspects of Christianity and the process that God is working in spiritually as a judgment on his own people as well. Obviously there's a personal aspect to that. That's going to be a little harder to determine. It may only be in hindsight that we're able to see some of those things with some clarity. Obviously there's a point where I begin to interact with Emmanuel. I will have you guys know that during the first couple weeks of taking care of Emmanuel after the stroke, it was on my mind as to whether or not to seek some medical help at any point. Initially our brother basically just said to give him some time to work through things. That seemed reasonable, being that he was lucid and just, physically incapacitated. As time went on, that became a more of a concern. So give me a day turned into 3 or 4 days, and then give me a week turned into a week and a half. And that's when I really begin to say, Lord, if I need to take action here, then I need to know from you that that's what I'm supposed to do. I don't want to intervene on what you're doing in this brother's life, not in any way, and I definitely don't want to presume. So, when this vision came, it became pretty clear to me in relation to some of the initial engagement and wrestling that I had with Emmanuel that was very much being somehow detailed out in Nicole's vision, with me trying to get him to wake up and see what's going on and whatever else. And then there's a portion of the vision where I had to step back and let how she describes actual wrestlers do their job. To me, there was some indication that was going to be to let the medical healthcare system wrestle with him. Not because I thought that was actually going to be the end solution, but it may very well, and seems to have been, for the preservation of his body, because his body was done. And thankfully they've been able to preserve his body for this interim of time. There are still some things that are yet to be unveiled. I think that is detailed at least a little bit more in the second part of the vision. So the cowboy and detective stages may or may not have already come and gone in relation to it, trying to do things in a certain way, trying to take care of the issue, take care of our brother in his time of need in a certain way. Ultimately, then it is then after those wrestlers that I come back along Emmanuel's side with satchel that has these horses in it. The horses, I believe, are representative of our young people in various stages and developments of maturity and activity in the spiritual realm. And that goes from the rocking horse to the standing horse to the galloping horse, I think, is a projected measure of maturity and growth. You'll notice that what brings Emmanuel to arousal or to some sort of engagement is the connection or the partaking of what is going on with those who are in a more mature state. That's the gallop. That is further detailed out in the second vision a little bit. I think we'll probably go ahead and listen to that as well. But at this point, does anybody have anything else that is clear from the Lord, or any other comment or question?
Kim did have a vision from July that she felt was pretty, it kind of tied in, and especially to what Noah was saying. I don't know if you want to, it's pretty long, so maybe I can send it to you and you can go through it, or
Yeah,
however you want to handle that.
yeah, if it's recorded, I think that'd
She
be
wrote it
helpful.
on Kingdom Age, so
Oh, great.
yeah, I'll text it over to you.
Yeah, please do that. There are a lot of details in the second part of the vision. Again, my warning against, or in to be aware of and vigilant against presumption, just let that remain in its proper place. But it's not a warning like I'm upset with somebody and saying, like, ready to slap your hand or something. We need to be very careful how we tread in this time, and be very careful about our. All I want to say is that the enemy is very keen to take advantage of anything that he can, and so we need to be careful about that. And hopefully we'll still be able to go back and put some of these things either in recording or writing. Obviously this is being recorded this time, so we can share that. I'm going to get to the second part of this vision here.
This is a continuation of the vision I was having when asked to pray for Emmanuel. I left off with these sets of horses that were seemingly 3 different types, and the Lord kind of showed me that they were representing something. The rocking horse represented like a childlike baby type of way, or
Pause it just for a second. And again, I want you, my input and interpretation of this dream, or the first section of the vision, came before the second part was even received, and before Nicole ever heard what my interpretation was. And so thank God the Lord has been very faithful to affirm some understanding here. And guys, that's not, please understand that doesn't have anything to do with me. I'm just really happy about it, because it's what we really needed from the Lord when we are in a time of need in seeking understanding. And so I think I already mentioned that, but this, and you'll see as this vision plays out, that this is representative of our young people and of this generation. And part of what God is doing in the midst of this difficult circumstance is initiating something in our younger generation.
Through
this difficult situation. And so, put your hearts before the Lord. Give your capacity and your willingness to the Lord. Let God do what he wants to do. Let's in the time of battle, in the time of God's need, not as if God is lacking. Need is as if those who are ready when God is ready. That's the time of need. The scriptures tell us that there is a generation that will be like troops that are ready and willing on the day of battle. They find themselves properly aligned and in the order that they need to be in for God's usage. And so, again, as is somewhat defined and described through this, let's not take too much let's not appoint too much to the various characters. Let's look at the processes that God is doing. Yes, there will be personal responsibility and placement, all those things. God's going to work those things out. But let's be very aware of the process that God is initiating.
Ministry or something, a way of doing things, I'm not quite sure. And then the middle horse was actually, he was showing me that it was being washed. And this horse actually had a bridle on it. And the person who was washing it, it had a head on its head. This is hard to explain, so this is the best I can do. There's actually a child's toy that has 3 separate parts to it, and you can turn the toy, like pretend it has like 4 different sides of 4 different animals, and you can change out the different parts. So like the feet would be of a tiger, the body would be of a cow, and the head would be of a pig. So it's 3 different animals and different parts of the body or whatever. And this was like an object like that, but it was the person's head, and it was just, it actually looked back at me looking at the vision, and I saw its face change into different parts like that. And then it just continued to wash this horse that was standing there. And then the third horse was actually ridden by a Native American, an Indian, but the word native has always been, as I see this character, has always pretty much been what it represents as being native. Anyway, when I say ride, I wouldn't even necessarily say ride, because it's not like he straddled the horse and went for a ride. This native was able to kind of stand on this horse and walk on it and just be really comfortable. What would look like a risky situation, but isn't. As the horse is galloping, it just, the person was just like almost like a dance, so freely able to walk upon this horse while it's in gallop. And I saw him, and he shot an arrow up into the air, and he hit a target. It came down and hit a target. And then after this, he actually threw his body up into it was like an arch, the way that the arrow went, and then his body went into an arch, and he almost in midair coming down shot through this bullseye with his arrow in his whole body as well. And then after this, Tim actually grabbed Emmanuel's hand and wrote a target on his hand, on the palm of his hand, and then placed that target over Emmanuel's mind or head. I'm not sure what that's meant to represent, and then he took an arrow and shot directly at close range into this target that was above his mind, and it opened up Emmanuel's mind or head. And this was very difficult to do. The Lord was showing me it was like a clam. Like, you have to really pull hard to get this space open. But it was needing to be opened up. And this is actually to the great pleasure of Emmanuel, because he was in there and had a good, happy response to this. Anyway, it actually took 4 men to open up this mind, and it was in 4 corners, and it was Matt was on the left corner, and then above him was John, and then if you keep going off to the right was Justin, and then forward was Tim. And they had to open it up with 4 corners and then shove these swords into place to keep it open, because because it just, and it's still, even with the swords in there, sort of had to be held open. And at this point, you can see Tim, he reaches in and he starts to just really look for things, and he's pulling things out, like just really going for it, looking for things and items and treasure. And anyway, and so that was his stance on what was going on here. Matt reached in his arm as well and wanted to pull things out, very eager to do so. Not exploring as much or going around as much as Tim, but definitely stuck his arm in to pull things out. John also reached his hand in to pull things out, but did it very meticulously and purposed, and would pull one thing out at a time, sort of, and look at it like a jewel. And then Justin, he did not stick his hand in. He just kind of looked and watched and observed with his eyes kind of darting back and forth, like just observing or looking around. After this, Tim reaches in and grabs this huge, I don't know if it's his Manuel's brain. It didn't look like a brain. I don't know. It was like a ball. And in this ball, it just looked like a ton of papers. And so Tim kind of pulled out a paper and would read through it and kind of like crumple it up and throw it out. He'd look through, go through, find, look, then read it very intensely, very purposed, looking, reading, crumple it up and throw it out. And then you can see as he finally got to what he was looking for, his face like lit up like, this is it. And he almost like jumps for joy in a way, and he crumbles up and then he eats it. And then after this, he motions to come. And the come never stopped. It was like with his arm, come. And in order for Tim to leave that position, he couldn't leave that fourth corner open. It had to still be held. So in order for him to leave and show a way to go do something different, he had to actually leave it. And I believe it was Andy that kind of came and took that position to hold it open. And after that, Tim took a ladder down, and I don't know if this was a ladder down into Emmanuel's mind, but it was down into a dark place, and I was supposed to go with you and follow you. It was me that was there. I don't know if it is me in real life. I just know that it was me that was there with you, or with Tim. And so in this dark place, it's all pitch black everywhere. There's still the motion to come from Tim, and so I'm following in this vision, and it's dark, and he has a torch. The torch doesn't light anything at all. It just, you could see us. That's all that you could see. There wasn't a lighting up of any area. And that was a long time of walking and just darkness to no end, to no, not able to see much, but the light that was being held, there's this torch. Then, after some walking, Tim stops. Somehow the lights put out, and you can see that he begins to stop and look in the spirit instead, and that actually lights up in the spirit. This blue spiritual light lights up, and it actually lights up a room. So now we can see something. Now this room is all in the spirit, and it has, it's almost like a storage facility. It has all these glass jars. It almost look like potions or something. It actually reminds me of this little, in the Lord of the Rings, where they give Frodo, that elf lady gives Frodo, Lady Galadriel, I guess her name is, gives Frodo that jar of light. It looked like those jars actually, and it looked like liquid like that in all these jars. So Tim walks up to the storage and starts handing me all these jars, and I mean, my arms are completely full to overflowing with these jars of whatever they are. And so the first thing that happens here is Tim actually is seen in this place, and I think he hands her, or has me hand her a jar, and she takes it, and she actually consumes some and then pours it all over herself. And it's a very welcome response. And I believe the Lord showed me the word sage in this. I don't know if sage is what's in the bottle. I just heard the word sage when trying to see, Lord, what are in these bottles? What's going on? And even he brought it up to me to see, and it's not in English, so I don't know what it says. And then I heard the word sage. Anyway, and so she pours it over her. And so what happens, what it causes her to do actually is completely strip to her bare naked body. And as she does that, this light comes over her body from the tip of her fingers to her feet and just changes her body completely. I can't say what that changes into. I mean, she's still Kim. I can't say. I just see the light go over her body piece by piece, and it changes her, and then she's able to be all dressed in white, and her posture is like to worship to the Lord. Like, she's just in this posture of worship. Her arms are stretched out to the heavens, and that's actually where we leave her. And then we leave this area and we walk a little ways, and then you open a door and it's literally like to another place. So we walk out there and we're in a jungle, and I think it's the jungles of Africa, and I actually think it's Tanzania. I heard Tanzania. I don't know if that's, I have no idea. Anyway, we're on this porch and we're in the jungle, and we start to walk forward, and we see actually Noah coming forward, and he's riding a bike. It's like a tandem bike, and he has actually a native from Africa riding in with him, and they have this like huge ball of packages on the back of the bike. I don't know, it's almost like sackcloths and things, like they had bundles full of stuff. I don't know, it's like bags roped together on the back of this bike, and Noah's countenance, or his way, he looks like he belongs there. He's got like, he's sweating and a little bit dirty, and he's got like, he's happy to be riding this bike. He's not, his countenance is very happy. Anyway, he comes up and he gets off of his bike and he embraces Tim in a very affectionate hug, just like, I don't know, rest his head even on his shoulders in a tight, close hug. And then he pulls away and looks at him with his face that's still full of joy. And then this begins to happen repeatedly, this hug, over and over and over again, and then pulling away and looking at one another. And as time goes by, Noah's face actually changes to being happy, and it gets to a place where he's actually pretty angry. So this time goes by to where he's happy all the way until he's angry. And at that point, during the embrace, I think it just continues to go on. Tim reaches his hand out and like gave me the bottle. So and at this point I had put all those bottles that were just sitting in my arms overflowing into some sort of bag. Anyway, so I hand him the bottle, and Tim opens it, and it goes into Noah's nose, his nasal passage, and it's like an aroma, a sweet smelling aroma, and it just changes Noah's countenance completely, and he begins to weep, just weep. It's pretty beautiful. And this veil comes off of his eyes, and it's not like a thick veil, it's a thin, almost, gosh, how would I describe this? It's like a thin, imagine if you stretched out bubble gum, like stretched it out, and it was a thin, like it has a thin layer, you know what I'm talking about? Anyway, that kind of was on his eyes, and he kind of just peeled it back, and it kind of just gently came off of his eyes, and he just wept in a beautiful weeping. And then after this, he began to talk to Tim, and Tim just listened, and he just shared, I don't know what he shared, but he began to just share, and it was really beautiful. And then he was actually showed his dad this shofar, and that he was meant to blow it. And so he began to blow it, but this came at no small cost. This was hard for him. You could see the strain in his face and his body, and it was hard to do, even though he knew he had to do it. So he began to blow it, but you could see it took a toll on him. But he did blow the shofar, and that is as far as this vision has continued.
There's a lot there. and maybe we can continue to put this before the Lord. I don't want to presume what that means for the days ahead. I think that there are some fairly obvious observations. There's one thing to take note of is what actually brings some joy and pleasure to Emmanuel, and that's going to be directly related to what his hope and desire has been as a vessel of the Lord. And that's for us to know, to come to know the mind of God, not just his own mind. And so, however the Lord is going to unfold that process for us, maybe there is some indication there. I think that there's a lot that our brother has preserved and reserved. For many, many years now, actually for almost 20 years now, you guys don't know some of my experiences. I've shared some with some people, but with Emmanuel, Emmanuel himself was having such big stuff from God all the time. It was such an outpouring, and that is a very unique thing. And as God was doing that in his own life, and as I was, and I mean, this is like back in the early 2000s, 2005 and 6, and Brother Emmanuel lived with us for a year and a half, and that was just before Elijah was born, right, babe? Just before Elijah was born, I think.
I don't remember him living with us.
So it was after Naomi, but very soon after Naomi was born, and then just before Elijah was born, he lived with us, and then we helped him get an apartment. But I remember continuing to meet with him on a more regular basis. There were some very specific things that happened about 2 years after that. And our times together became more intense. I can remember one night in particular, and this experience is definitive of many. But what did Rachel say? Yeah, that was right. I took him home. We had spent some time together. It was dark. We sat out in front of his apartment, and we were sitting in the car, and Emmanuel, he's going. And it was like, then we were gonna pray together, and we wanted to hold my hand, and like it was intense for a really long time. And I was so. Has anybody ever stood under a big waterfall?
Yes.
Yeah? No? So the weight of the water and the concussion, it's very concussive. You're like pressed down. You can't see, you can't hear, and the weight of the water pummeling over your body becomes so intense that you become completely numb. It's like your body gets numb because it's just getting literally beat up because water weighs a lot. That's kind of how it was to spend time with Emmanuel. You were just like completely overwhelmed. All of your senses are done. Your ears from the outside to the inside, and your brain is throbbing. And like you can hear words, but you're so over the top that you don't know how it could be possible for you to even remember what happened. And so like, I went through years of that. And I hope you can received that I'm not saying that was a negative experience. It was something that I didn't know how to, I didn't know what to do with it. At the time I felt, man, well this has to be useless at this point because I'm not getting anything. And then later on, probably about 5-7 years later, sometimes that experience didn't change much in terms of the intensity and the amount of outpouring and content. But what I began to realize is that there was a way in my reception to keep those things. And, as I related to other people who had some extreme difficulty being able to receive Emmanuel and understand him, my encouragement was always, just don't toss it away. What my impression was for many years was there is something of great value here, and it needs to be preserved. So what I do not have the capacity for now, I will, just through a commitment in my inner man, I will commit these things to the Lord for preservation, like in a storehouse. And I was reminded in Nicole's vision of that mindset that I carried for more than a decade. And, the last decade from here backwards, the Lord has most definitely began to bring out so much, not just like realization, but truth, reality out of those, see, that's not related to Emmanuel. There's a grace there that is being flowed out and can be, in a sense, tapped into for the right postured person, and that is not just unique to myself and Emmanuel. It's exemplary of a way to receive God's wisdom and have him impart certain things that can then be passed along. So that that was highlighted to me a little bit when I heard that, because we'll see how that plays out, but very evidently there's a part to play for each one of us in the community as it pertains to how that go. Nicole's and Kim's role, I think, are very much related to the operation together with myself of the apostolic and the prophetic together, to be able to bring this life source out in its depths, which is what's represented by this light, this spiritual light. The blue light that came out in the deep darkness is a spiritual light, and it's a manifestation of wisdom in a certain way. And so there's also something early on related to the young people and this generation rising, coming into a place of maturity and unity. The native is not, I don't think, really having to do with American Indian peoples so much as it is being more a native to the land, a native to the promised land, the promised work of God, and the flow of work there. The imagery of the horse and rider there it's like a dance. It's like something it's a single unit operation. And so there's a level of not just maturity but function that becomes something beyond simply the two put together. And then that becomes useful for service in the latter part of the vision. I think Noah, in this case, is representative of a generation. And it is this younger generation and them coming to their placement, and what that means for the peoples of the earth, and for whatever those bringing of the good gifts are. in relation to what the needs of the peoples are, and then ultimately the sounding forth of the shofar, the horn, which is the trumpet call of God. So no further conjecture there on my part. Any other input and particular insight? We won't share it this evening, but the word that Emmanuel had for me that in the middle of the night, I think very much weaves into these visions. And my point in sharing is in many ways to bring some peace and settlement to your hearts. God has not abandoned his work in our midst. He's very much keen to see it continue. And that's where we need to find our peace and rest and solace, and also wait for our assignment from him, and then be ready with a spirit of readiness and willingness toward him. Again, I will mention one final time, be aware of the spirit of presumption. That's a warning to myself and to all of us. Let's be careful about that, so that we can walk in faith and obedience and with purity of heart before the Lord. Let's pray for one another. I'm going to ask you guys to pray for me and for our brother Emmanuel, and let's keep one another in fervent prayer. I mean, now is, as any other time, the time to really hear from the Lord, and a time to walk in intimacy with God, so that he can be our only source of life and hope and peace. I don't believe that we're entering into a time where we just hide away. I think there's something that the Lord wants to birth out in our midst. But again, presumption has no place there. Do not take a presumptive step. Every step needs to be made in faith and with confidence, and God's going to give us that direction. His word will literally be a lamp unto our feet. And if you want to redefine the word, we talked about that a little bit today. God's expressed will is the word, and that will provide the need for the standing that we take in every step that we take. So, anyone else have any?
Storm King, and it's when you're like looking up the mountain and you're walking up the path, it looks like there's a plateau, and it looks like you're about to get to a flat point, but when you get up there, it just keeps going, and it's a false something. I don't remember
False
the
summit.
word. False summit.
Yeah.
And that's I don't know why, but I had the impression of just don't let your guard down. And I don't know what that means. I don't know what that implies, but it was a very clear visual.
It is ever man's tendency to find a plateau, to have a perception of achievement and fulfillment. But the mountain of God ascends yet, and there is a higher place that he is calling us to. I was reminded of a dream that I had long ago when Rachel and the kids and we were ascending the mountain. We got to a point, and then I saw something higher. We needed to ascend higher. Mm-hmm. More importantly, I don't remember, there was a dream or vision maybe that I had. I can't remember if it was me or not. I think it was. Where we were ascending various parts of the mountain, and there were various camps representing the placement of various camps of Christianity and where they had decided to stay. And an announcement, in essence, was made that because it was like the time of Nehemiah and Ezra, where the temple was to be rebuilt, and an announcement came over that mountainside that the temple was no longer going to be able to be built, and it was a great discouragement, but everybody kind of stayed where they're at. And I remember in that vision or that dream that I continued on to the very pinnacle of the mountain, and it was a very difficult ascent. I'm not drawing that out for my own sake, but there's a people that will continue on. We might be able to review a few of Emmanuel's visions or dreams of a very similar nature to the ascension to the very top of the mountain. There is no relent until Christ returns to claim those who belong to him and to establish even on earth the fulfillment of his kingdom. Then we are to ascend to the highest place of spiritual operation and function and growth, but also in growth and maturity as a people and operation of his living ways. There is no achievement that can be reached without the fulfillment of Christ in our midst, and so there's always something left for us to pursue, to gain, and to ascend. And of course, there is that Psalm 24 that asks the question, who is able to ascend the mountain of our God? But he who has clean hands and a pure heart, such is the generation that will seek your face, O God of Jacob. So let's endeavor continually, as we read in Psalm 139 and that other reference, let's let God search our hearts, so that wherever there could be an offensive way and where he knows what is within us can be brought to light, so that we can continue on by his grace, with his power, not in our own strength. God knows the sincerity of our heart before him along that line, and he will continue that work. And so thank you for that. That's a very sobering reminder of the journey that we are on. I think we can readily acquiesce to the ideal that we don't want to settle. And that's very different when it comes to the very circumstances of life that seem to offer us that stopping point or that plateau. And let us also not be discouraged when the journey is still upward and yet steep and difficult. It is ours to travel if we are willing and found to be willing. So again, young people, you guys in particular as an example of this generation, be freed of your aspirations. Please do not accept the world's limitation of who the world thinks that you should be, or what you imagine yourself to be, either in your placement in the world or even in your walk with God. Don't pre-imagine that, but be faithful where he has put you. There is no work, there is no engagement that is too menial for you. It may look meaningless to man, it may mean everything to God. Let God determine the days, the appointments, the seasons, the relationships of your life. Don't plan it out. Let those aspirations go. There's only one reason to exist right now, and it is for the fulfillment of God's heart, for the establishment of his people, for the building up of his house, and for the operation of his wisdom and his ways in the midst of that house. Everything else is a peripheral. God will care for your needs. He will make a provision for you. He will ordain your relationships. So let all of those burdens, please, you will dramatically advance, exponentially advance at this time in your life if you will let those things go. They're not healthy burdens for you. They are worldly, earthly, temporal burdens, and they are not meant to hinder God's sons. Release them and be released into the grand scheme of God's design. Let him do what he's going to do. Let everything else fall to the wayside. It will please your Father. It will please those who have given their lives to enable you to do it. And God will take care of everything else. We have that assurance. So do it with joy. Do it with freedom. Let God be your advancement. Amen.
Amen.
Blessings to all of you online. Love you.